here with competing unanimous consent requests, and the American people are going to continue to suffer, whether it's some little kid that's not going to be able to go to a Head Start program, whether some senior citizen's going to miss his meal on wheels, or the other programs, in addition to the devastation that's going to take place to our airports. Sure.
Thank you. Senator, I really appreciate your taking the leadership here, and as I understand it, and I want you to confirm it, what you've done is you've suggested that the cuts that are hurting so many of our American citizens be restored, and you're paying for that. You're not putting it on the credit card. You're paying for it by taking funds from the overseas account because we're winding down the wars. Am I correct that what you're doing is paying a price that equals the amount that you're restoring of the sequester? Is that correct?
That is true.
Okay. And I also wanted to say to my friend, and I know others want to speak, so I won't be long here, but I will stay around and hopefully have a chance to expound on this. But from what I understand, we are really suffering in this country. I mean, I have examples of people who were turned away from cancer clinics. They can't get their chemotherapy. And the Cancer Society, which is not a government entity, has said this is very dangerous. Is my friend aware that patients are being turned away and not getting the chemotherapy? Grants are not being funded. I know he mentioned that, but I think the fact that patients who need chemotherapy to live, some of them are being denied this, is my friend aware of that?
In addition to that, I say to my friend from California, there are research programs dealing with dread diseases in addition to cancer. That research is being curtailed.
And I would also say, I wondered if my friend knew, and I take just the city from the Midwest. In Cincinnati, 200 children will be dropped or denied access to Head Start. And Anita Wolf, a mother of 2 special needs children, said she may have to choose which child can remain in Head Start's enrichment program. I say to my friend, we're here because this is hurting people. This isn't about statistics. And I'm just very disappointed that we can't work together and restore this. At least, how long does my friend restore these cuts? The next 5 months?
5 months.
Right? 5 months. And so I just wanted to thank you for yielding for these questions, and I will listen to my colleagues on the other side and respond in due course. Thank you.
President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
The reason that patients can't get chemotherapeutic drugs has nothing to do with the budget. It has everything to do with the administration of CMS and the payment recognitions. I've been working on this issue for 3 months. It has nothing to do with the sequester. It has to do with what the CMS has ruled in terms of payments and appropriate payments. The majority leader is a wonderful man. He has a different view of what it takes to get our country back in shape. He's actually split with the president this afternoon because the president said the only way that he would, in fact, turn off sequester is with a tax increase. And the only way that this could be considered a tax increase is spending money that we weren't ever going to spend anyway, is acknowledging that we're going to charge it to our children. So in essence, it'll be a tax increase, it's just not on us. It'll be on every child. The same child that he makes a moment of. It doesn't have to be this way. The president could agree for flexibility. His secretaries could ask for reprogramming authority. But they've not done that. And why have they not done that? Because in the president's own words, he wants sequester to hurt. What a position for the CEO of this country, for the leader of this country, to say, I'm going to teach you a lesson. I'm not going to use judgment and priority and categorize things that are most important and fund things that are least important. I'm going to reject all attempts at flexibility. And I want to make one other point. The president keeps saying they've saved $2.5 trillion. The majority leader just said the same thing. What the American people ought to know is $1.2 trillion of that, quote, savings is increases that were planned that aren't going to happen. Let me say that again. $1.2 trillion of the, quote, savings were spending increases that were planned that aren't going to happen. Well, everybody that runs a family budget or runs a business knows that's no savings. You didn't save any money that you were going to spend and then didn't spend. It wasn't saved because you never spent it. But it's the wonderful way Washington accounts that's different than the way all the rest of us have to live our lives. So let's go back and review. We as Republicans agree we ought to fund the most important things of our government. And we believe there ought to be priorities to that. But we also believe we ought to save a future for our children. And the answer that we found ourselves in, sequestration, the answer to that problem is to give the administration the flexibility of making priority choices, just like the rest of us do. And if they don't want to use it, then they won't use it. But the fact is we won't pass that. The same tools that we'd all use ourselves, we won't pass that. Now, why is it we won't pass that? To order things in priority, to do what's most important first. I would tell you the conferences that the FAA spends and the amount of travel that the people within the FAA spend are a low priority compared to keeping controllers working. We haven't seen any cut in those programs. None. Matter of fact, the President's budget recommended taking $800 million out of the airport improvement program, if you will read his budget. That was the President's recommendation. So now we're really at odds with the President, because he says we can save that $800 million. It's flabbergasting to think that there's absolutely no common sense in Washington and that we won't do the things that are in the best long-term interest for the people of this country. And so what we do is we create a situation that's going to tremendously impact our nation, both the business and the common citizen who's traveling, and we do it for political gain to prove a point, not because we have to, because we're going to make sequester hurt. We can have the security that American people are wanting is to know the future is okay. The future isn't okay with us operating the way we're operating. And I know government isn't easy, and I know it's messy, but there are some absolute truths. And the absolute truth is you can't spend your way out of debt, and you can't borrow your way out of debt. And we're taking $88 billion over the next year out of the budget, out of a $3.7 trillion budget. If we're not capable of doing that, none of us should be here. Either party. What we fail to recognize is what the real risk is for our country. And the risk is we're running out of time and the ability to continue to borrow in the world. And the only reason we look good today is because everybody else looks worse. We're the only rose in the bud vase that's not wilted right now. And that's going to change. And when it does, the consequences for our kids, for our families, for our economy, for our GDP is going to totally change. Because if we went back to historical interest rates today, when we quit printing money, which we will eventually have to, it will add another $650 billion a year to our expenses. It does nothing for anybody. So this small 4.5% that the administration refuses to even work on to make it less painful to the American public shows what kind of trouble we're in. Madam President, I'm disappointed, as is, I know, the majority leader, that we can't work out a way to solve this. But they're two totally competing philosophies. One ensures a productive, successful America. The other shows an America drowning in debt. And there has to be a point in time when we say, can't we run this government more efficiently, more effectively, and do it in a way that preserves the future for our children? With that, I yield the floor.
Madam President, Mr. Leader, there are a number of people on the floor that have been here some time, and I thought I would try to add a little order to this. I don't know. I think Senator Manchin got here first, so what I'd like to do, what was that? So he still wants to talk. How much time does the senator from West Virginia wish to take?
I have no more than 15 minutes.
Okay, and how much time do you need?
I think 10 minutes would be
Okay.
sufficient.
And Senator Boxer, 15, I understand. So,
I would, if I were allowed to go first, I would do 5 minutes.
got a deal. So I ask unanimous consent the senator from Alabama be recognized for 5 minutes, the senator from California be recognized for 10 minutes,
Fine.
and the senator from West Virginia for whatever time that you need.
Madam President,
Senator from Alabama.
the proposal of my friend, the majority leader, and I know he has a tough job, is how a nation goes broke, how a nation loses confidence of the people we serve. August 2011, this nation agreed to the Budget Control Act. My friend Senator Reid said the Budget Control Act was good as a budget. It's not, but it has some teeth to it, and what it did and is indisputable, it limited the growth in spending. We said we would raise the debt ceiling $2.1 trillion, but we would promise immediately, which has already almost been spent. We've run up that much debt since August 2011, another $2 trillion. But in addition, we would reduce spending over 10 years by $2.1 trillion. The sequester involved $1.1 trillion of that. If the committee didn't reach an agreement, it would have specified cuts across the board. They're not wise cuts. We shouldn't have done it that way, but it was a reasonable amount of money for sure. So in the budget that was passed, or the Budget Control Act that was passed, spending would have gone up from a flat $37 trillion over 10 years to $45 trillion over 10 years, instead of going up to $47 trillion over 10 years. So the growth would be from 37 to 45 and not 37 to 47. Now that's not a real cut in spending. It's a reduction in the growth in spending. Now, the sequester comes along, and we proposed many solutions where we could alter these cuts, give flexibility to the cuts so they don't be as sharp and as unwise as the sequester called for, and as long as the spending stays within that level. And we also agreed that the President signed it, and it was passed by both houses, Democrats and Republicans. The leader voted for it. It had no tax increases. It was simply an agreement that would reduce spending a little bit over 10 years, and we would raise the debt ceiling by an equal amount. There was no tax increases in that. And so the President submits a budget. He wants to do away with the sequester and pay for it with tax increases. And that's what the Democratic Senate budget did also. It had increases in taxes and increases in spending, and a chunk of that was wiping out the sequester that we just agreed to. We told the American people, look, we made a little reduction in the growth of spending, American people. Forgive us for raising the debt ceiling. A lot of people didn't want to raise the debt ceiling at all. But we promised we had done something good. We were proud of ourselves. Before the ink was dry, the President in January submitted his budget in 2012 that wiped out those cuts and spent more money. And his budget this year does the same thing. And the Senate Democratic budget did the same thing. I mean, how can we possibly ever get spending under control if we don't comply with what we promised? So the majority leader has said, well, the war is coming down. The war costs are coming down in the future. And we'll just score that as savings, and therefore we don't have to raise taxes. We'll just spend the money. We won't have the sequester take effect. We'll just spend all that money, and we'll pretend we saved it by not fighting a war 10 years from now. Can you understand this? Let me tell you what experts have said about this gimmick. Maya McGinnis at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, they've worked really hard in a bipartisan way to deal with these issues, said this, quote, "This is such a glaring gimmick at such a serious moment." Such a glaring gimmick at such a serious moment. Robert Bixby, the Concord Coalition out of New Hampshire, that's a long-time respected bipartisan group, they said this, quote, "The mother of all budget gimmicks. To pretend that we're saving money because we're not spending emergency money on a war that ends. I mean, we could still be saving money on World War I. At that rate, Washington Post reporter Laurie Montgomery said, "Counting money not spent on wars that the nation is already planning to end is widely viewed as a budget gimmick." And it certainly is.
Used 5 minutes.
So, Madam President, I would ask for consent for one additional moment.
Without objection.
So basically our colleagues are saying we can't even reduce spending growth even that much. We can't stand any of that. We refuse to lay out alternatives to make the cuts less painful. We want them to be as painful as possible so we can attack those who propose even modest reductions in the growth of spending. And we're going to punish the American people because they dare to reduce the growth of spending. They're basically saying, the government's saying, it's not our fault we've got a problem. It's yours, American people. You didn't send enough money. You send more money. You send more money. We refuse to reduce the growth of spending. I thank the chair and would yield the floor and thank Senator Coburn for objecting to the proposal of the majority leader.
Madam President,
Senator from California.
Madam President, I work with my colleague from Alabama on a lot of issues, and we do work together on occasion. But on this particular issue, we see the world very differently, which is to be respected. And it is with full respect that I say this sequester isn't necessary. It was put into place, these across-the-board cuts, it was put into place to be so difficult and so painful that both parties would come together, Madam President, and come up with a solution. The President has tried and tried and tried. He said to both parties, why don't we meet in the middle? Let's replace the sequester, these mindless cuts, with other cuts that make sense and aren't painful, and the other half with tax reform, doing away with subsidies, tax loopholes such as the billions of dollars a year that oil companies have been getting. It just doesn't make sense since they're the most profitable companies probably in the world. But Republicans' answer to that, we're not going to look at taking away these tax breaks from big companies. We're going to not look at trying to see whether millionaires and billionaires can pay any more. We want to replace the sequester with more cuts. Madam President, I know that it's a fast-moving country we live in, and Lord knows you've gone through some difficult time in Massachusetts. And I want to thank you for your leadership. But we don't have that short a memory. We remember this awful recession that almost turned into a depression. And we know because it's basic. Now, I'm an economics major a long time ago, but there was a basic understanding that when times are tough, the government doesn't turn to austerity. The government helps us by saying, you know what, maybe this is a good time to fix those bridges, to build those highways, to do the things we need to do, because a great country needs an infrastructure, and this is the time to do it because we need the jobs too. Well, we have no partners over there. Now Senator Reid comes up with a very sensible plan, and here's the plan. For the next 5 months, we restore the sequester, we take away those mindless cuts, get us back to a normalcy, try to find another solution, a long-term solution, but in the meantime, pay for stopping the sequester by cutting from an overseas war funding account as we bring home our soldiers from Afghanistan and Iraq, we have an account that can be drawn down. So when our colleagues say that Senator Reid is raising taxes to do this, he's not raising tax one. He is cutting spending by taking savings out of this overseas war account. Makes a lot of sense. The American people want to see the Afghanistan war to come to an end. The American people want to see the Iraq war totally be completed. So we're saying take that money and how about spending it here? Now, their answer today, which is so astounding from Senator Coburn, who objected to this very important bill, Senator Coburn said he has the answer. It's called flexibility. What does that mean? It means that all of these cuts, these billions and billions and billions of dollars of cuts, we will then tell the agency, figure it out. You figure out where to fix it. For example, in the FAA, they have an airport improvement fund. They're saying, well, we don't have to fire these air traffic controllers. Let's not do that. Take the money from the airport improvement fund. Madam President, if you know anything about the airport improvement fund, it is not an idle fund. It is a fund that is paid for by taxes that people pay so that their airports will be improved. Hence, it's called the Airport Improvement Fund. So whether it's making sure the runways are safe or making sure that the terminals are cleaned, this is why we have airport improvement funds. You can't rob Peter to pay Paul. I want to say to my friend, he left the floor, and he is my friend, Senator Coburn, flexibility is not the answer. If somebody comes to me and says, a colleague, Senator Boxer, I left my wallet home and I'm starving, can you lend me $10? And I say, flexibility. What flexibility? He left his wallet home. Flexibility does not pay for air traffic controllers. Flexibility does not pay for teachers. Flexibility does not pay for FBI agents, and if we ever learned anything from the horror in Boston, it's the unbelievable first responders, in addition to the citizens, who rushed toward the blast. The people there, the professionals, the doctors who happened to be there, we pay those people. You know, urge to the Senate. Not everybody lives off a trust fund. People need to get paid. And flexibility doesn't do it. I can't tell people, if I get a call from an air traffic controller, oh, why don't you just volunteer on your day off? He'll probably tell me he's going to figure out a way on his day off that he's forced to have, his furlough, try to figure out a way to make some money for his family. Sometimes I wonder if we're in Alice in Wonderland around here. And nothing could be more true than today. Now, I want you to know that I have people in Los Angeles who are stuck on runways for hours and missed very important functions. How about one of my people in Los Angeles, I have his name, it's not important, said that he missed a funeral in Boston on Monday because his incoming flight was delayed. And here's the quote: "We had to cancel our whole trip because the funeral is tonight and we're not going to make it." Flexibility isn't the answer. The answer is restore the money from sequestration. The FAA announced plans to close 149 airport control towers nationwide, including many in my state. And how about people that are getting turned away who need chemotherapy? And the American Cancer Society Action Network said, because of sequestration, quote, funding for cancer research and prevention programs is taking a dangerous hit, unquote. Again, I say to my Republican friends, this is from the private sector commenting on what's happening around here. The National Breast and Cervical Cancer Early Detection Program will provide 32,000 fewer breast and cervical cancer screenings These are life-saving screenings. You want to tell that woman flexibility? That's not the answer. The answer is restore the funds from the sequester. Head Start, about to lose 70,000 of its 1 million slots for children. Let me tell you, in Cincinnati, 200 children will be dropped or denied access to Head Start. And Anita Wolf, a mother of 2 special needs children, said she may have to choose which child can remain in Head Start's enrichment program. I'll tell you, this is a bad situation. In Oakland, the Housing Authority is losing $11 million, and 900 fewer families will get housing. And I would ask unanimous consent to put the rest of my comments into the record at this time.
Without objection.
Now, we are seeing delays at our ports. We are seeing dock workers idled. And these delays, from one of my people, he says, I have to hire the labor and pay them while I wait for customs to clear the vessel. It's having an impact on our economy. So just to finish up, Senator Reid took the leadership today. I'm so proud to stand with him. He found a place to get the money to put the funds back in and avert the sequester, stop the pain at the airports, stop the pain at the clinics, restore Meals on Wheels to our seniors, all the things I talked about. And he paid for it by going to the war fund that is winding down and making sure that we can fix this problem for 5 months. It is shocking that my Republican friends would object to this when their constituency is feeling the same pain as the rest of us. I thank you, and I yield the floor.
Thank you.
Madam President.
Senator from West Virginia.
Madam President, I ask for permission to speak up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise today to speak in support of the Marketplace Fairness Act. I was a co-sponsor of this important legislation in the 112th Congress, and I'm proud to be a co-sponsor in the 113th Congress because this is truly a matter of fairness. The Marketplace Fairness Act will allow local, Main Street, we call them brick and mortar, but they're basically businesses, little stores with real people in them, working hard to make a real living. And it'll provide much-needed financial relief to state budgets that have been cut to the bone in recent years and are facing even more cuts in federal assistance thanks to what we're just discussing here, the disastrous sequestration with the draconian cuts that are there. Mr. President, this bill isn't a Washington handout to businesses. It isn't a special treatment. It isn't a new tax. It is leveling the playing field. That's all it's doing. It's leveling the playing field. And every day we don't act to pass the bill is another day we risk. Another small business closing its doors, not only in West Virginia, but all across this country. There's always a lot of talk in Washington about helping small businesses, and rightly so, because small businesses, as you know, in your state, Mr. President, small businesses account for more than 60% of all the private sector jobs. This is small businesses, not the large businesses. And the Marketplace Fairness Act, it's a chance to do more than just talk about it for once. We have a chance to do something. Really show that we care about small businesses. It levels the playing field and gives our Main Street businesses a fighting chance in competing with Internet vendors that are not required to collect sales tax. Let me give you an example in a small rural state such as West Virginia. We're expanding and working very hard on the Internet, broadband, high speed, trying to get in every little nook and cranny, up every little hollow, and down every little creek. We're trying to help the people, and that's great. But what it'll do, it really puts more pressure on the small businesses because now with the convenience, people won't travel. They might not go to the store. But if they want that service and they know the prices are the same, there's not an unfair advantage or a level playing field, the small businesses still have a chance. And that's all we're asking for. Business owners in West Virginia tell me all the time how unfair it is to watch their online competitors offer lower prices on the exact same products. We've heard a lot of talk about that today. And that's called showrooming, and that's just basically people shopping. They used to go shopping in the old days. They go to one store and they would compare, then they go over to another store and they'd compare, and they'd work back and forth and figure out whether they had their best deal or where they thought they had the best deal with the best service. That doesn't happen online. First of all, in my state, they have a 6% advantage because our sales tax is 6% in all of our counties. So that's a 6% advantage from the get-go. And in these hard economic times, price is the driving force. Price is the driving force. That's why this bill has so much bipartisan support. 74 votes, Mr. President. You've been here a short period of time, but you're very observant, I know that, and you've watched very few times that we've got that type of broad bipartisan support on anything. And that's what's refreshing to see. And with all of my friends that come from states that don't have the taxes, and friends on both sides, my own colleagues on the Democrat side and Republican side, what I understand and what I know will happen is, first of all, they don't collect the tax of in-state residents if they buy on the Internet. They won't collect that tax because they don't have a sales tax. Now, if they say it's unfair because they're collecting it for me in my state, even though someone in West Virginia might buy from a state that doesn't have a sales tax, but they have an Internet business, that's not going to put undue pressure, I don't believe, or unfair competition any way, shape, or form. They still need to use all the services in my state to sell their product in the state that they don't have a sales tax. They're going to use the roads to deliver that product to my customer in my state. They're going to use the people that have been educated through the school system in my state. And all I'm asking for is the fair share, the fairness that we charge our own customers and our own businesses collect for us in our state for those that are using my state as their business to do the same. I don't think that's unfair. I really don't. And I think a majority of businesses don't think that's unfair, and a majority of Americans don't think that's unfair. It's not a complicated piece of legislation. It's only 11 pages. That's pretty short compared to most of the bills we see around here. And basically, it just does what we said. It allows the states to collect sales tax, and out-of-state sales provided these states streamline their tax codes. There are some restrictions that come with this. They must either voluntarily adopt the measures in the streamlined sales and use tax law, which 24 states have already done, including my little state of West Virginia. Do you know that we were the number 3 state in the nation to join in this fairness movement many years ago? And when I was governor, we worked very hard to work with the other states, and we built up to 24 states that basically were acceptable towards a tax code fairness. And that's really what it was about. Or a state can meet 5 mandates. There's 5 mandates they can meet. They can notify retailers of rate changes. They can create a single organization for collecting sales tax. They can establish a uniform tax base, or they can use destination sourcing for sales tax rates and provide free software and hold harmless protection for retailers. To simplify that, what that means, some states might have different tax codes in different counties. Some counties have different taxes that they add on to their state tax, or then they have a municipal tax. And they're saying that'll be 9,600 different tax codes. It's almost impossible. For anyone to participate in this piece of legislation, they've got to make a decision on one of those five criteria I just mentioned. That brings the tax code down to 46. It simplifies it. So that argument doesn't hold either. The complication of 9,600, and I know it's been used with our good friend from New Hampshire. The beauty of a state without a sales tax that doesn't want to participate. They don't have to. That's the beauty of it. They don't have to. They don't have to participate. They don't have to collect the sales tax from their people, as I said earlier. So they have that option. I know all the arguments against the legislation, but again, I would say they're just wrong. Some critics say this is a tax increase. That's wrong. If I'm paying 6% in West Virginia when I go to a store in Fairmont, Charleston, Huntington, Weirton, Martinsburg, Greenbrier, Lewisburg, wherever I go, it's the same 6%. Only thing we're saying is if you buy on the Internet, you'll be charged the same 6%. It's not an increase. It's the same. And I think that makes it pretty simple also. And it really does give our little stores with the people that basically are the same people that we go to participate, give donations and contributions to the Little League. How many times do you see an internet company giving to the Little League in your hometown, contributing to the Chamber of Commerce in your hometown, giving to any of the different fund drives you might have, volunteer fire department? And what we're saying is we've got to do everything we can to keep them alive and healthy. Some critics say online services don't use the local service that they're paid for by the sales taxes, so they shouldn't be required to collect the sales taxes. That's wrong also, because I think we just talked about that. They also say whatever product you order online, let's say it's a book from Amazon, or shoes from Macy, or towels from Target. It was delivered, it still has to get to you. It has to use the infrastructure that your state's responsible for to invest into. And that's our sales tax. Sales tax in all states that collect sales tax go into general revenue. General revenue supports a cadre of things, everything you can imagine, from your schools to your roads, to the programs that people are needing, to your senior citizens. It supports every aspect of life in your state. Our little state, when you look at the whole overall, the fact that the little stores and online retailers sell identical products and use the same infrastructure to deliver those products, and collecting taxes that are owed on a purchase at the point of sale rather than relying on consumers to pay that tax voluntarily, as some critics have proposed, would mean $23 billion. $23 billion that is going uncollected. Now that's just the fairness that we're adding to it, just the fairness. But $23 billion for needed revenue in states that are having difficult times. You've heard a lot of people give testimony here today that if their little state gets the amount of money that it would get by having a fair level playing field in their taxes, they could reduce their taxes. Well, that's a good opportunity today in these difficult times. If West Virginia could have collected a sales tax on out-of-state sales during the fiscal year only of 2012, not new taxes, just those already owed to the state, if you took the sales that was done over the Internet, we would have put $103 million more in our state's budget. $103 million more. Our budget's around $4 billion. That's a good chunk of money. And we could have used it to do a couple of things. Let me give you an example of what we could have done. With that extra money from Internet sales, we could have built 412 miles of new roads. 412 miles. We could have hired 2,000 school teachers with that money we didn't receive. We could have built 5 high schools. We could have built 7 middle schools or 10 new elementary schools. Now, you talk about jobs, you talk about infrastructure, you talk about basically investing back in your state. That's money that we weren't able to do that with, and that would have helped us. Now, when you talk about the e-commerce growth, if you look at the growth of businesses being done online versus businesses being done in retail stores, you'll see quite a disparity. And it's going to continue to grow and put more pressure. We think that this is not going to intervene with the Internet sales, and the reason we say that is because of our busy lifestyles. If that's the way you want to shop, fine. But you just won't be able to say, well, I can save money because I don't have to pay the sales tax. It might make you think about, you know what, I'm going to go down and buy at John's Hardware Store. I know John and Mary, they do a heck of a job. I'm going to go down and see them. Price is the same. I like that local service. I know the money will stay in my local community. They have a fighting chance now. Trust me, we won't put any Internet businesses out of business. That won't happen. In 2000, the U.S. economy supported $27 billion in e-commerce, which constituted 9/10 of all retail sales. Over the next 12 years, e-commerce grew tenfold, totaling $224 billion in 10 years, tenfold, which is equal to 7% of all retail sales. 7% now of all retail sales. 10 years ago, wasn't even 1%. Now it's up to 7%. One market analysis projects that online retail sales in the United States will grow by 10% annually through 2017. 10% annually. So when you look at that, from $224 billion in 2012, that'll be over $370 billion in the next 4 years. The next 4 years. And I was just telling you in 2012 what our little state lost and what we could have done with it. Think of all the missed opportunities we're going to have, not just in my state, but in states all over the nation. So just look at how the Internet use has soared in the United States since 2000. Some 240 million Americans are online today. We have about 330 million inhabitants of this great country, United States. 240 of them are online today compared to half that amount when this century began. So a little over 10 years ago, we only had about 120 million. We're going to have full integration of our Internet, which is good. I think it's good. I just want to make sure it's fair. That's all. Just fair. As broadband speeds grow, home and mobile Internet users will spend more time online, and that means more time online shopping. That's fine, too. They just won't be able to say, you know what, I'm going to save 6%. They can't say that up front. That means they're going to shop a little bit more, and that means we have a chance. If I have a little store in Farmington, West Virginia, where I came from, I've got a chance to survive now. Gives me a chance. I don't start out in the hole. I don't start out with my hands in my pocket and I'm 6% behind to begin with. Google researchers have found that already 97% of Americans look for local products online. So clearly, the businesses back home are at a huge disadvantage in competing with online retailers if tax requirements are unequal. This makes sense. State governments are losing billions of dollars in uncollected sales tax that could build the infrastructure that we all need. Mr. President, I've heard from so many businesses back home in West Virginia, and I can tell you there's overwhelming support for this legislation. And there has been from day one, since we became one of the first states to enter in to the Streamline Compact. That was in 2003, started out with 3 of us, up to 24 states now, and we have a pathway for all the states to have equalization. I own a small business that encourages people to support local West Virginia artisans. This is what this lady says. She wrote me from a small business owner. Her name is Parween Mescari in West Virginia. She says, I own a small business that encourages people to support local West Virginia artists. Because we sell from a physical storefront, we must collect and remit sales tax from our customers. Online merchants do not currently have to collect or remit a comparable tax on sales they make online. That is not only fundamentally unfair, but seriously impairs our ability to be competitive in the market when we have to charge our customers a tax that they don't have to pay when they shop online. Mr. President, I want to commend Senators Durbin and Senator Enzi and all of the senators and my senior Senator Rockefeller for taking leadership on this important issue and for introducing the Marketplace Fairness Act. I'm a proud co-sponsor of that because I believe it is fair and it's good for America. I believe this legislation restores fairness and balance to our tax system. It strengthens our businesses. It revitalizes our downtowns. It creates jobs, helps states struggling to provide the services their citizens expect. The measure has broad support in both parties, as you've seen by the votes that we've already taken. It's backed not only by mom-and-pop stores in Main Street America and merchants, but also by giant online retailers like Amazon. And I urge the Senate to act without any further delay. I thank you, Mr. President, and again I say to all of my colleagues, this is a matter of fairness, and it's a matter of one that I think really restores the fairness in American retail. Thank you. And I yield.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you. My friend from West Virginia says that this bill is important for his state, and I understand that. But this is a bill that doesn't work for my state of New Hampshire. And his suggestion that if states don't like it, they have the option not to participate just doesn't work because the businesses in my state of New Hampshire are going to be affected. This is a proposal that fundamentally violates state sovereignty. It enables one state to impose the enforcement of its laws on the 49 other states and territories without their approval. And this legislation would impose new burdens on small businesses, not only in New Hampshire, but actually across the country. I represent a state that does not have a sales tax. There are still some states left in this country that don't have sales taxes. So you can understand why I oppose this measure, because this legislation will hurt small, online, family-owned businesses in New Hampshire, businesses who have no experience collecting sales taxes whatsoever. Now, the proponents of this legislation have said that small businesses won't be affected. thanks to the exemption for businesses with less than $1 million in revenue. Well, that's just not true. This legislation creates a disincentive for Internet firms to grow and create jobs for American workers. We know that the margins for so many small online retailers are very slim, and I'll give you an example. I've heard from a small business owner in Hudson, New Hampshire. Hudson's down along the border of Massachusetts. I know you know it well. His business is approaching $1 million in revenues, and he has about 6 employees, just 6 employees. Now, under the Internet sales tax legislation before us, this company would be considered a large business, revenues over $1 million, because they're almost there. But if this legislation passes, the company's plans to grow are really in doubt. They're going to be forced to reconsider whether or not they're going to continue to grow, continue to hire more employees, because this arbitrary threshold creates a real disincentive for them to grow. Now, e-commerce has been a real boon to small businesses in New Hampshire and across the country. It's helped companies find new markets. It's helped them add new revenues. But for companies looking to grow through online sales, this legislation represents a real ceiling for growth. That's why I've joined with a number of my colleagues to call on the Senate to rethink this legislation. We need to think through its unintended consequences. Small businesses across the country, not just in non-sales tax states like New Hampshire, but small businesses across the country will see their tax burdens increase. And I want to give just a few examples of the new burdens that are going to come with this legislation. First, as I mentioned, each state has different sales and use taxes, so businesses would need new software to figure out how to collect and remit the right taxes. And it's my understanding that the states under this legislation would be responsible for providing that software to the businesses in their states. Now, I think this creates an unfunded mandate for the state of New Hampshire to have to provide that software for the small businesses in the state who would be affected. Small businesses would also need to collect personal information from each buyer to make sure they're complying with all state and local sales taxes. And these small businesses would also have to deal with audit and enforcement actions from out of state. In other words, they would have to answer to taxing authorities in places where they have no representation whatsoever. And as states and localities consider new taxes, these small businesses would have no voice in that process because they have no representation in those jurisdictions. So these are just a few examples of the many unintended consequences that this legislation would create. I intend to join with a number of my colleagues in filing amendments to improve this bill, including ways that we can protect states' rights and small businesses. If the state of New Hampshire doesn't want to participate because we have no sales tax, and we don't think our businesses should be forced to collect Massachusetts sales taxes or Maine sales taxes or Vermont sales taxes online, then it seems to me that we ought to be able to opt out of this legislation. The citizens and small businesses in New Hampshire who will be affected by this legislation deserve a full hearing on these issues, and I urge my colleagues to join us in addressing these defects before we pass this bill. Thank you very much, Mr. President. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Senate today continuing to debate whether to move forward with the Internet sales tax bill. If no agreement is reached on the legislation, a vote on whether to proceed could happen tomorrow morning. Do you support or oppose the Internet sales tax bill? You can go to facebook.com/cspam to let us know. Majority Leader Reid today announced a proposal to replace the automatic budget cuts under the sequester with war savings. The Hill writes that the Pentagon has said it saved some $81 billion that it would otherwise have spent on the war in Afghanistan if not for President Obama's decision to draw down the U.S. troop presence there. The story goes on to say the Republicans have derided war savings as a budget gimmick in the past. One of the reasons Senator Reid gave for proposing the measure is closing air traffic control towers and the furlough of air traffic controllers. Here's Senators Jerry Moran of Kansas and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut from today, calling on the FAA to postpone the furloughs for 2 months.
Thank you very much for joining Senator Blumenthal and I on a topic that we have been engaged in now, it seems like, for a very long time. As you may recall, we made an effort in the continuing resolution to make certain that the issue of air traffic control towers was addressed. The administration had announced the closing of more than 140 towers. I believe that that's contrary to public safety, and I certainly believe it's unnecessary for the administration to take the position that they are taking. And in fact, the amendment that I offered, that we offered, was designed to give them clearly the flexibility to avoid the closing of air traffic control towers.
Senators Jerry Moran of Kansas and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut earlier this month proposed legislation to prohibit the FAA from closing 149 FAA contract control towers and the furloughing of its air traffic controllers. And today, the senators called for postponing the closure of the towers and the furlough of employees for 2 months. We're going to watch that in press conference.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining Senator Blumenthal and I on a topic that we have been engaged in now, it seems like, for a very long time. As you may recall, we made an effort in the continuing resolution to make certain that the issue of air traffic control towers was addressed. The administration had announced the closing of more than 140 towers. I believe that that's contrary to public safety, and I certainly believe it's unnecessary for the administration to take the position that they are taking. And in fact, the amendment that I offered, that we offered, was designed to give them clearly the flexibility to avoid the closing of air traffic control towers. You may recall that I made the plea of Secretary Ray LaHood to indicate his support for the amendment. He told me that while he'd like to be helpful, that the administration opposed that amendment. Senator Blumenthal and I had, to my knowledge, no senator who opposed this amendment. It was a very bipartisan effort, but because of the administration's opposition, I assume it was never allowed to come to a Senate vote. So we again I believe that the administration has the ability to avoid closing air traffic control towers. And I believe they should use that flexibility and that discretion. But in the absence of that, Senator Blumenthal and I have introduced legislation to prohibit the closing of those air traffic control towers. And that the sponsorship and support for that legislation continues to grow. We introduced it just a few days ago. Already we have 33 co-sponsors, 18 Democrat members of the Senate, 15 Republican members of the Senate in support of the prohibition against the closing of those air traffic control towers. I think what we're looking for is just some common sense, some recognition that we have the ability to prioritize. I'm a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee and a member of the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee. Administrator Huerta was in our was in our committee last Thursday, in which I found no satisfaction in his responses, and again indicated to him that the FAA could make different decisions than they are currently making. He indicated to me, in fact, my question to him was, why is it a higher priority to reduce the funding for air traffic control towers as compared to the funding of unobligated balances in capital and research accounts? And he indicated that he did not have the authority to use those dollars. My point to him was that's exactly what our amendment provided, was the authority to use those dollars to use them to keep the air traffic control towers open. The FAA has concluded that there's a 2-month hiatus in the closing of the towers due to lawsuits filed by a number of airports across the country. In the interim, that ought to give Senator Blumenthal and I the opportunity to pursue a legislative remedy unless the administration, in my view, comes to their senses and solves this problem without legislation. We are inquiring of Chairman Rockefeller. Conversations have occurred with his staff. We hope that the Commerce Committee would consider this legislation. I will continue to encourage both Chairman Rockefeller and Ranking Member Thune to do exactly that. We've now seen the latest manifestation of this issue in the furloughing of air traffic controllers. And again, I could have no better ally, no firmer colleague in this effort than Senator Blumenthal, and I very much appreciate his help and support. He led the effort in the budget on this issue and had greater success than I did in the continuing resolution. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Well, let me first of all thank Senator Moran for his leadership. He's really been at the forefront of this effort, and I've been very proud to be a member of this team, which now includes senators from the states that are affected, and many more will be affected. More than 40 states around the country have these contract towers, which are vital not only to air safety, but also to economic development and jobs. What's at stake here is the risks to air traffic that are minimized or reduced by these air traffic control towers, but also economic development in areas like New Haven, for example, where Tweed Airport would be substantially impacted. It isn't just the LifeStar flights that come into Yale New Haven Airport or the organ transplants that fly in by private plane, but also the economic development in the Tweed New Haven area with bioscience and medical research that is aided by the airport there that would be very substantially impacted by the closing of that air traffic control tower. And so this move has widespread implications in the regions that are affected and across the country in air safety, but also economic development and job creation. And that's why it really is a matter of common sense, as Senator Moran said so well. It is a matter of basic common sense that saving the $50 million at stake here is not really saving at all. In fact, it's penny wise, pound foolish. It is long-term a cost to the nation. And I think that all we're doing is enabling the administration to do what we think it can do right now, but says it can't, and that is to move the money in the FAA accounts from one account to another. And I think that a vast majority of the United States Senate agrees with us, and obviously the vote on the budget shows it, and I'm looking forward to moving forward in the next 2 months, if necessary. My hope is that the administration will do administratively what we think it has the legal authority to do anyway.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the furloughs of the controllers themselves. What do you think of the administration's contention that it really doesn't have a lot of leeway other than to make that kind of move? And what, if anything, do you think Congress can and should do about those furloughs?
Well, I hope in the hearing process that we've asked Chairman Rockefeller and the Commerce Committee to have in regard to air traffic control towers, I have no doubt but what this issue of controllers will be front and center as well. And so I think that it certainly is an issue that the committee ought to examine, that Congress ought to address. Again, I think the administration does have the flexibility, and if they don't, and perhaps it's easier for me to say this than Senator Blumenthal, but we attempted to give the President the authority to have the flexibility of picking and choosing, that there was to be no necessarily across-the-board cuts. And as you may recall, the administration issued a SAP indicating that the President would veto legislation that gave that flexibility. So, one, I think that the administration does have the opportunity to make decisions about prioritizing spending within the FAA and within the Department of Transportation. But if they do not, they ought to be asking. I mean, the surprising thing to me is that this administration, this President, doesn't want or doesn't even ask for the ability to reestablish the priorities. My experience in serving in Congress with two previous administrations, and what I read from history, is every president wants more authority, not less. And the attempt to give the President the authority to make those prioritization decisions is something that they're not even asking for.
Let me just add, I believe the administration ought to postpone these furloughs at least for 30 days to give the Congress an opportunity to act. As a member of the Commerce Committee, I think that our authority certainly would permit a more flexible and constructive response to the sequestration requirements at a time when there's heightened security or concern about security around the country in the wake of some of the recent developments in this country. The additional crowds, potential confusion at airports certainly ought to be avoided, and that's why, at the very least, there should be a postponement of those furloughs, not only to avoid cost and inconvenience, but to address the heightened concerns about security.
Sir, do you agree with some Republicans who are saying this is alarmist, this is the administration trying to raise the red flag over sequestration and get rampart and that kind of thing?
What I believe is there ought to be a postponement of these furloughs to give all of us a chance to revisit the constraints that are imposed by sequestration.
Yes, sir?
There's going to be a lot of pressure to come up with money to stop the furloughs. How's that going to affect your effort to transfer money to keep the control towers open?
I think there's broad support. I would see these issues together. Both involve the air traffic controllers and furloughs, as well as the closing of air traffic control towers, involve the safety of the flying public. They involve the inconvenience of those who travel by air. They affect the economy. They affect our national security. I see them both tied together, and I would guess that there would be a more universal solution to this problem in which both control towers and air traffic controllers would be considered in the same legislation. So I see them moving along together as a team in finding a solution. Senator Blumenthal, as a member of the Commerce Committee, I, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I certainly have the sense that members of the Appropriations Committee, including Chairperson Barbara Mikulski, who came to visit with me after the CR, indicating a willingness to help find the necessary resources to make certain that the control towers were not closed. There just is broad consensus and widespread support for solving these problems. Again, I would put the onus on the administration to solve the problem, but in the absence of their willingness or desire to do that, then I think there's strong congressional support for a solution for both the control tower issue, which we got involved in a long time ago, and now the most recent manifestation of this circumstance with the furloughing of air traffic control tower controllers. Interesting to me, Administrator Huerta was in front of our committee, in front of the Commerce Committee last Tuesday, in front of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation last Thursday, and made, to my knowledge, no reference or statement in regard to what he was going to announce the following day. And I would encourage greater cooperation and communication between the FAA and Congress, particularly the committees of jurisdiction for the FAA in simply not. I don't know how you come up with a plan that you announce on Friday that you're furloughing on Sunday. Seems to me there would be a much longer kind of lead time to give airlines and airports greater ability to respond. And so the circumstance we find ourselves in is surprising to me and unnecessary. And I certainly would join with Senator Blumenthal to suggest a delay by the administration to give the administration a chance to change their mind, or give Congress the chance to respond.
Senator Moran, I mean, Senator Blumenthal didn't go directly at this, but do you think the administration sees a political benefit in having the public understand or feel some impacts from the sequester?
You know, it's always hard to attribute motives to people and the decisions they make. I explained to you that Secretary LaHood indicated to me that he would like to be helpful, but the administration opposed the amendment. And his explanation was that we are only interested in long-term solutions, not short-term solutions. A very unsatisfactory answer when you're dealing with the continuing resolution, which is nothing but short-term solutions. The entire continuing resolution was about how to fund the government from now until September the 30th. So no satisfactory explanation for why the administration opposed our amendment. And it certainly has led to the speculation by many Republicans and Democrats that there is an effort afoot to try to demonstrate that the sequestration is something that is so painful that it cannot be accomplished without causing dramatic consequences. I would remind folks, as I've said before, I didn't vote for sequestration in the first place. I think across the board cuts are inappropriate, irresponsible. We ought to be having the appropriations process to prioritize spending. We ought to have the hearings that determine what we can afford and what we can't afford. I'm not here to defend the process that we're going through as far as sequestration, but I am here to say that there is a better response by an administration than the one we've seen to the circumstance that we're in. No one has explained to me satisfactorily why they would oppose taking $50 million from unobligated balances to keep air traffic control towers up and running. And in the absence of that, it lends itself to the belief that there is something else afoot here trying to demonstrate in a political sense that sequestration is something that the country cannot afford. And again, hard to attribute motives, but I would say that that's the best explanation that I've heard. I have no other.
And I would just add, you know, I take the administration at its word that it needs this authority to avoid the sweeping ramifications of closing these air control towers. So we're going to give them that authority if, in fact, they need it. But the two are linked because closing the contract air traffic control towers puts an additional burden on the control towers that are staffed by FAA employees. The response of the administrator when I asked him about Tweed, for example, which has commercial flights, is that they could use surrounding control towers, whether in New York or at Bradley Airport in Hartford, and now those air traffic control towers are going to be further constrained in their staffing. So the two systems are really very closely linked, and that's why this step is important, to keep those air traffic control towers open at the contract airports, as well as a postponement in the furloughs, which will enable all of us to see what the legal authority is, where the cost and inconvenience and economic impact can be reduced, and make sure that we don't inhibit the economic recovery that is going slowly, all too slowly, and fragilely.
As I said in the debate on the continuing resolution, if the administration is trying to make the political point that sequestration is difficult to accomplish, very damaging to the public, to the American citizen, this is not a place to make that point. Let's have the debate about sequestration. Let's have the conversation about whether or not we can afford a reduction in the growth in spending. But let's not put those who travel in this country's safety at risk to prove that political point. So it is, to me, it certainly seems as if politics is playing a significant role in determining what actions the FAA are taking, and every indication that I have from conversations with my colleagues is it emanates from the White House. Last question? Yes, sir?
Well, I mean, so is it your sense that you think Congress will act on both the furloughs and the tower issue separate from a broader budget deal, just in isolation, deal with those two issues?
You know, my view is that sequestration is here through September 30th. We ought to try to address the specific challenges. Again, Richard may have a different view than I do on this, but we ought to try to address the specific challenges that presents in regard to air traffic control towers and air traffic control furloughs. Needs to be addressed now, ought not wait till after September 30th. But we need an appropriations process that is working. I cheer Barbara Mikulski on in her efforts to make sure that we get back to regular order. This is the place that these decisions should be made in prioritizing our spending. In the interim, we ought to solve the problems that we can solve, and we ought to particularly solve those problems that affect the safety of the American people.
And I would just add, you know, whatever the politics here, the effort of the United States Congress ought to be to reduce and minimize the harm resulting from sequestration. There's no point in doing more harm. Our motto or mantra should be, as the doctors say, first do no harm. And that's what is resulting from this approach to sequestration in an area that is not a thrill or a luxury for many people. Travel is essential to the functioning of our economy. In this day and age, air travel is integral to business development and job creation, and all of us have a stake in making sure that we do nothing to harm that interest in addition to air safety.
I think Senator Blumenthal and I's call is that the congressional process ought to work. We ought to solve this problem, and we'll live to debate the consequences of sequestration and the appropriations process in the future. But in the interim, let's solve the problem with air traffic controllers and the furlough of control tower operators.
And this is a very bipartisan effort. We have bipartisan support, not only Senator Moran and myself, but also in the co-sponsors who have joined us in this effort. So we can all agree that we should move forward on this bill.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Illinois.
As consent, the quorum call.